Okay, we are recording live. So welcome everyone. I'm Tina McIntyre, Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent with the UF IFAS Extension in Seminole County. And on this webinar today, we have Terrence Fullerton, who's our fertilizer educator for Seminole County, and Tony Cintron, our lake management specialist. So we are going to be covering the various aspects of Florida Friendly Landscaping and let you know about the various services that we can offer you and how to engage today. I'll turn it over to Tony.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Tony Cintron. I'm a lake management technician here in Seminole County. I'm the newest member of the Seminole County Lake Management team. I may have met some of you recently at the MSBU meetings for your lake. On behalf of Seminole County Lake Management Program, I'd like to welcome everyone and thanks for taking time out of your day to attend an important presentation on Florida-friendly lawns and fertilizing effectively and safely. We look forward to working together to create a possible synergy with your lakefronts. We know we've done serve events and things like that on your lakes and restoration. We'd like to expand those possibilities to bringing your lawns and gardens into play in a way that benefits the entire ecosystem. So with that, I will
Excellent.
Turn it over to Tina.
Thank you, Tony. And just to let you guys know, feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box. If there's any questions about your lake particularly or any of the stuff that we're covering today, just go ahead and put it in the chat box, which is usually just on the right side of your screen, or you can look for chat and click on that, and that'll help you navigate any questions to us. So with that, diving into our presentation. So Florida does have unique soils. They're very sandy, and many native plants have evolved to exist in those soils. So that's why we have our great natural lands and areas. But when we start talking about growing other species, like maybe our lawn and landscape species, they tend to need a little supplementation. So evolution, looking at how plants have done it, this pitcher plant actually catches insects to feed itself. So that's one way that nature has kind of solved this problem. But again, it's not that easy. When we look at our lakes, rivers, and streams, a lot of the times they can have impacts from the nutrients that we're using in our lawn and landscape. And those of you that live on lakes, you might know that we can have effects from these nutrients that can come from fertilizers, from septic tanks, and from other sources. So here you can see a lake that has an algae bloom. The nutrients, and we'll talk more in depth about this, but the nutrients can feed that algae and the vegetation, the aquatic vegetation. And this problem does exist in Seminole County. So we've had kind of that trajectory where we have, nutrients coming from various sources leading into the lake, and then ultimately leading to a demise in recreation or, fishing populations and things like that. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we can definitely send you information. The Seminole County Water Atlas is really good information about your particular lake and other lakes in the county. And that's quality data collected by people on Tony's team. So again, just to kind of point out, we do have impaired water bodies in Seminole County. And those are denoted by the red, and this could be impairment for nutrients such as the nitrogen and phosphorus that I mentioned. It can also be bacteria or other parameters. But our biggest focus today is those nutrients. So it can, kind of turns into acronym soup, but basically it can be, on a total maximum daily load, or get put on what we call a study list, or a verified list, and things like that. And that just basically means that the county, along with the state, have to start working on making that water body healthier. And so that's why we're kind of, talking more to you about what we can do, that if your lake is not impaired, how can we prevent that? And if your lake is, maybe having some issues, what also can you do to, make it more healthy? So we have impact on property values, obviously, when there's media and news about these algae blooms, they can occur. And so this is a picture of the St. Johns River, which Seminole County does discharge to. And, you know, you have the large homes with the algae overgrowth there. Of course, when we have large algae blooms or a decrease in water quality, we can also see an impact to wildlife. And Seminole County, the natural choice, is rich with lots of wildlife. And so we want to make it a good home for them as well. So our fish, our bears, our alligators, you know, they all depend on clean water as well. And then, like I mentioned before, you know, impacts to recreation. So here pictured on the left, you can see the aquatic vegetation that is fueled typically by the nutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus. So it's either, typically it depends on the lake, it can get very complicated, but these nutrients are typically gonna be feeding, you know, the base of the food web. So it's gonna be the algae and the aquatic vegetation. Now that could be submerged, like this gentleman here on the left is showing, that's a submerged from underneath the water. Or over here with the paddle borders, that's more of an emergent vegetation that's coming out of the water. Of course, algae could be on the top of the water or in the water column itself. So looking, I know not all of you live on the Wekiva River or in the basin, but some of you may. And you know, the problem is complex no matter which basin we're talking about. So in the Wekiva Basin, you can see that urban turf grass fertilizers are contributing to about 26% of that nitrate loading. So this was a study done by Florida Department of Environmental Protection looking at specifically where are these sources of nutrients coming from. And when we look at that, we do see septic tanks, wastewater treatment facilities. But the difference for urban turfgrass fertilizers is that we have power to change that. And that's what this is all about today is, you know, looking at how we can change our behaviors to impact these numbers here that affect our waterways. And so a solution is really Florida-friendly landscaping. And Florida-friendly has what we call 9 principles. And this is in the state law, and it's protected by the state law that any homeowner that's interested in implementing affiliated things that are supporting these principles can do so. If you live in a homeowners association, it is important to get that approval. But we definitely, you know, want you to be installing rain barrels and using mulch and doing all these principles such as checking your irrigation system, making sure it's calibrated well, and that you're selecting plants that fit appropriately for the sun, water, pH, and the various environmental aspects of the site that you have. And then there's other principles, of course, attracting wildlife, recycling, which is like composting. We want to reuse and recycle that yard waste. We want to be sure that we're not blowing our grass clippings and our leaves into the lake or into the storm drain, so that we're recycling that organic material for our plants to take advantage of. And also it will save us money. So, you know, we want to also reduce stormwater runoff and protect our lakefront. Some of you might have conservation easements around your lake or buffer zones, like a, you know, 10 to 15 foot buffer zone between you and your lake with a little access for your dock, while others, you know, it might not be as, you know, vegetated. And so what we encourage you to do is select those Florida-friendly plants around your shoreline to be able to help buffer that lake from environmental pollutants that could be from, you know, anything, pet waste, fertilizer, different types of road runoff, various sources. And so, like I said, the foundation of Florida Friendly is right plant, right place. So you can see here, this is the same exact species of plant, a very common landscape plant, where it is in the wrong soil on the left, alkaline soil. And it's very yellow, it's not able to uptake the proper nutrients. And on the right, it's in more acidic soil, which it generally prefers. And so if we test our soil, which is what we always recommend at UF IFAS, is start with a soil test. And we're still processing those. The UF IFAS lab in Gainesville is still testing those. And if you're interested, let me know. I'm happy to send you the form. You can do it right from the comfort of your home to be able to take that soil test and be able to understand the pH and the nutrients that are associated with that, so that you can select plants that are going to be more suitable. So when we look at specifically turf, which is obviously a very common plant for our homeowners associations and various neighborhoods, we do see that the tolerance for turf in shady environments is not good. So if you have a shady environment, you want to think about other alternative ground covers or other species that would be more suitable for that shady landscape. A lot of times people will try to sod and resod areas under oak trees or other trees, and they habitually will die. And so we just don't recommend turf in a very shady environment. And there's no real amount of fertilizer or management that we can make that work. So we want to start off with that right plant in the right place, considering our sun, water, and soil environment. And again, for those of you who missed it, if you have any questions along the way, we're happy to answer those. So just put them in the chat box and we will address those. So building on those Florida-friendly principles, we really do want to irrigate wisely. And, it can be complicated irrigation systems. There's a lot of buttons and a lot of pipes and rotor heads and all kinds of things. But really the best way that I recommend is just doing a quick catch can method, where you just put out some tuna cans into the landscape, turn on your system for 15 minutes, and then see how much water you're actually putting out, because I could have different pressure than you have, and you want to make sure that you're getting 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and I'll talk more about that. But when we're not irrigating properly, we are going to be wasting our water resources. We're going to have increased costs to our water bill, and it really creates a rotting environment. So we want to avoid overwatering or watering at bad times of the day. And my next slide will address that. The other thing is, you can have, like, say you did just have an application of fertilizer, you're going to be leaching that fertilizer the more that you're watering. So you want to make sure that you're watering just the perfect amount for that species that you're looking to grow. Again, we can have root rot and then decreased resilience in drought tolerance. So we want to make sure that our plants are hardy. So again, how much irrigation? Well, like I said, it's that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. So if you put those cans around your yard, nice flat, tuna cans, turn it on 15 minutes, and then take a measurement at each zone, and you should be averaging about that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. We do have watering restrictions, and so right now we're in the rainy season. You can water twice a week, and it's different for odd and even times of the year. So just considering your address, you would want to water on the appropriate day, which you can see there on the screen. And then actually during the cooler months, UF IFAS only recommends watering every 10 to 14 days. So that's once every 2 weeks or so. You're going to be watering, that's November to March. And that's because everything is dormant, and we don't need to be excessively watering the plants because they're dormant. So mulch is fantastic. It's a great addition to any landscape. It reduces erosion and holds that soil moisture in the root zone. So typically in our sandy soils, when it rains or when we irrigate, that water's going to penetrate quickly through the sand. And mulch helps the water stay right in the root zone and makes our irrigation more effective. It's going to reduce weeds. We recommend about 2 to 3 inches of mulch at least. And you can apply that nice thick amount. It's going to inhibit the germination of weed seed. And then we also want to be sure to allow for circulation. So you don't want to smother the base of any plant, be it an annual, perennial, shrub, tree. You want to just make sure there's a nice, you know, circle around the base of that trunk so that we're not what we call volcano mulching to smother those plants. And then there's other ideas to keep that water on your lawn to be able to percolate down. Especially if you live by a lake and you're susceptible to maybe some flooding or what would have historically been like a wetland. You just want to be careful with, you know, flooding, of course. So some ways to reduce that on your property can be rain gardens, which would be an area that's already depressed. And then you would vegetate that with aquatic plants that would make it very beautiful, and then you wouldn't have to mow it. We have rain barrel installations, which can save up to 55 gallons per fill that you would be mitigating and then be able to use on the property later. We have downspouts. So you want to make sure those downspouts are pointed towards your vegetation or rocks and not pointed towards, say, the stormwater system or your driveway or any kind of paved surface. And then swale and berms, some of you living on a lake might already have this, but basically it's a little trench that we dig, you know, before the lake so that that water can slow down, percolate down, and it's not rushing off into our lake systems. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our fertilizer educator, Terrence Fullerton, to talk more about fertilizing and soils.
Okay, thank you, Tina, and welcome everyone. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about fertilizers and the Seminole County Fertilizer Ordinance. And excuse me, to summarize it, the ordinance requires you to use fertilizers that contain 50% or more slow-release nitrogen. This year, it actually goes up to 65%, even though it's not being enforced, but the rule is that we should have at least 65% of our nitrogen should be slow release. The fertilizers should all be phosphorus-free unless you have done a soil analysis. There are restrictions as to when you can use the fertilizer and where you can apply it. You are not allowed to apply it too close to any water body. So let's get into some of the more details. Next slide, please. Okay. Fertilizers normally have a name on the bag, and that name really doesn't mean anything. It may say turf fertilizer or fruit tree fertilizer. There's no law or there's no industry convention as to what name you can put on a bag. You can put anything. However, in Florida and most other states, the law is that you must have 3 numbers on the bag, and the first number always tells you the nitrogen content. The second always tells you the phosphorus content, and the third always tells you the potassium content, always in that order. And those numbers are therefore a better indicator of what the fertilizer contains than the name on the bag. And because we need phosphorus-free fertilizers in Seminole County and most of Florida, in fact, the second number, the phosphorus, should be 0 unless you have done a soil analysis to show that it's needed. Most of the soils in Florida do not require phosphorus for landscape plants. There are some exceptions, and where you need the phosphorus, you should use it, but you have to verify it first with soil analysis. Now, slow-release nitrogen is just the normal nitrogen fertilizer that has been given a special coating on it. Normal fertilizer, if you apply it to the soil, 1 shower of rain, it gets washed out. The plants don't get to use it, and it ends up in our rivers and streams. The slow-release fertilizer has a coating on it, and that coating is not a perfect coating. There are tiny pores in it that allow moisture to diffuse in very slowly, dissolve a little bit of fertilizer, and diffuse out very slowly. And therefore, one application of fertilizer can last a very long time. It feeds the plants a tiny amount every day and can actually last several months. So you don't have to continuously reapply fertilizer. Just one application stays in the soil for several months. The fertilizer label shows you, or by law, has to show you not only the total amount of nitrogen, but how much of it is slowly available. And in this case here, the fertilizer has a total of 14% nitrogen. And at the bottom, you can see 7% slowly available nitrogen. So 7% is half of the 14%. It means it meets the 50% requirement. Half of the nitrogen is slow release. Next slide, please. This is not part of the fertilizer ordinance, but it is a recommendation for healthy plants. Florida soils do not contain sufficient potassium for healthy growth of most plants, and it is therefore recommended that your fertilizers should contain potassium. It does not have a huge effect on growth, but it has a huge effect on the health of the plant. And where you don't have potassium, you get more pests, more diseases, you get poor cold tolerance, poor drought tolerance, which means you need to irrigate more. Overall, the plants are not healthy. So for turf, a general purpose fertilizer that we recommend will be something like 1608, where 16% nitrogen, half of which or more should be slow release, no phosphorus, and we recommend that the potassium level should be about half of the nitrogen level for turf. Now, if you are growing other plants like fruit trees and flowering plants, you need more potassium. Those plants have a higher demand for potassium. And in fact, for fruit trees, we normally recommend palm fertilizer, which contains way more potassium than nitrogen. Now, if you look in a lot of the stores in Seminole County, you would see that there are fertilizers on the shelf that are really not suitable for general use. Here we have two examples of them where the second number, phosphorus number, is high. And these are often sold to homeowners as starter fertilizers. You're told that if you are starting a new lawn, new sod, you should apply some of these to get your plants going. And that is a good idea if and only if the soil analysis shows that it is needed. Now, we also want to make sure that we do not apply fertilizer at the time of the year when it's just going to be washed away. The wettest time of the year, that is from June to September, if you apply fertilizers, especially if you apply soluble fertilizers, they are simply going to be washed out of the soil. So the ordinance requires that you do not apply phosphorus or nitrogen fertilizers between the months of June and September. Now, you also are not allowed to apply fertilizers within 24 hours of a rain event, or if there is a forecast for heavy rain. For example, if we are under a storm warning, that is not the time to apply fertilizer. If your soil is completely saturated, soaked with water, and it's not draining, you do not apply fertilizer to a wet soil. So you have to remember that restricted period, June to September. Next slide. The recommended times to apply fertilizer for turf in particular is in the spring around April or May. And if you use the correct slow release fertilizers, that application will remain in the soil for the entire summer. There will be no need to apply any additional fertilizer. In October, after the restricted period has ended, you can do another application if you want to boost the plants. But the critical one is the one in the spring, in April or May. And after that, during the wet period, you should not be using any fertilizer. However, during the restricted period, you are allowed to apply fertilizers that do not contain nitrogen or phosphorus. For example, if you have a potassium problem, you can apply potassium fertilizers. Iron can be applied at any time. It's very useful for turf. It gives you a nice green color without causing any pollution problems. Manganese can enhance disease resistance. As I mentioned, potassium can be used. Lime can be applied at this time if your soil is acidic. You can apply lime. And compost can be applied at any time. If you have missed the opportunity to use mineral fertilizers and you still want to apply fertilizers, you can apply compost. So as a summary, do not apply fertilizers within 15 feet of the water. This is part of the Seminole County Ordinance. Different counties have a slightly different ordinance, but the closer you go to the water, the more likely you are to get fertilizer in the water. So you must keep 15 feet away from any water body. That includes ponds, drains, rivers, streams. And it is strongly recommended that in addition to the 15 feet restricted zone, you also keep a 10-foot low maintenance zone from the water. And in that low maintenance zone, you plant Florida-friendly plants that do not require much maintenance. You do not apply any fertilizer, obviously, any manure, any organic material, no pesticides. You do not mow or don't mow too often. And you leave it in a near natural state. And that zone acts as a filter to absorb any nutrients that may be being washed down the slope, and it will absorb them before they get into the ponds. Another requirement is that you must make sure that you fertilize your plants and not your driveway or the road. That means every fertilizer spreader should have on it, or must have on it, a deflector shield. You can see the orange deflector shield here. And you can engage it when you are near to a paved surface, and it prevents fertilizer from being spread onto the paved surface. And then you disengage it to apply it when you get back into the middle of your field. Every manufacturer has a different design, but every spreader must have some type of mechanism to prevent fertilizer from being spread onto paved surfaces. Grass clippings contain very large amounts of nutrients. And if they get into the waterways, they will have the same effect as if fertilizer gets into the waterways. So by law, under the ordinance, you are not allowed to simply blow your clippings into the rivers or streams, or blow it into drains, and if it disappears, you're happy. And you can actually be fined for doing this. So you are to, these clippings also contain nutrients that can be beneficial to your landscape. So if you put it back onto your lawn or into other areas of a landscape, you are getting free fertilizer instead of letting it go into the water and causing nutrient problems. Next slide. What if you don't take care of your lawn yourself, but you have a landscaper do it for you? Well, you are still responsible for making sure that the yard is fertilized properly. And we have available a checklist that you can go through with your landscaper to make sure that they're doing things properly. The questions in it include things like, have you done a soil test? If you have not done a soil test, are you using a phosphorus-free fertilizer? Are you using slow-release fertilizer? Do you make sure that you keep your clippings out of the waterways? Are you certified? Everyone who applies fertilizer for pay in Florida by law must be trained and certified. And that's one of the questions you should ask your landscaper. Have they undergone training? Are they licensed? So we have this available for you. You can download it and go through it with your landscaper. So you can use summer blends containing, as I mentioned, potassium, iron, manganese, and other nutrients. This should be based on soil analysis. You can use compost, is strongly recommended. Organic matter is always useful in Florida soils. It helps the fertilizers to work better. It helps the plants to absorb nutrients better, to absorb water better. And so mulch and any other organic material that you apply to the soil really enhances the health of the soil. Even if you are also using fertilizers, organic additions are always recommended in Florida. Now, the ordinance applies to all unincorporated areas of Seminole County. Legally, the county's ordinance does not apply to the cities, but the cities of Altamont Springs, Castleberry, Lake Mary, Longwood, and Oviedo have adopted the same ordinance. So although they're going to be administered differently, They are actually identical. The city of Winter Springs has a slightly different ordinance. They follow the state model, and the principles are the same. There are a few differences in the details, but the ideas are the same. The city of Sanford has not yet adopted an ordinance. We are recommended to people living in the city of Sanford to follow the county ordinance until Sanford comes up with its own ordinance. Now, the ordinance applies to all landscape plants. It does not apply to farms, vegetable gardens, fruit trees, unless they are within that 15-foot zone from the water body, then it applies. It also does not apply to recreational turf like golf courses and soccer fields. Thank you. I'll turn you back over to Tina.
Thank you, Terrence, and thank you guys for joining us. I just wanted to throw up my contact information. If you have any questions at all, feel free to send us an email. You also have my other email, so either one will get to me. And then that's also Terrence's contact information, Tony. And then if you have specific plant questions, we have our Master Gardener Plant Clinic. They are still operating virtually. And so if you wanted to email a picture, you know, we will help you identify plants, identify insects, get to the root of, you know, so to speak, the root of your problem that you might be having with some of the landscaping needs around your yard or your neighborhood. So feel free to take down that email address and send in any plant inquiries that you might have. And then this last slide also shows the Seminole County Lake Management Program contact information. So you can see, you can contact Gloria or Thomas, Joey, and Tony there. So any of the in the lake needs, they're there to help you as well. So with that, thank you all so much. And we look forward to interfacing with you in the future.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.